Well, welcome back, everyone, to the agenda. It is now 2024, and this is the agenda with your Missoula County Commissioners. I'm Commissioner Dave Strohmeyer. I'm joined by my friends and colleagues, Commissioner Juanita Vero and Josh Slotnick. And this week, we'll be talking about a number of things related to transportation, traffic, road planning, etc. And joining us today is our resident expert, Aaron Wilson. He's a transportation planning manager for the Missoula Metropolitan Planning Organization, which we can talk a little bit about what that means here in just a second. But thank you for joining us, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And Aaron, I do believe you're also going to touch on the world famous Reserve Street.
Oh, always. You can't
That's
talk.
infamous.
Infamous. Yes.
Much beloved.
Much beloved.
Can't
Love
talk
to
about
hate.
can't talk about transportation without talking about Reserve Street.
They are talking about it
everywhere.
Glad to have you
worldwide.
here.
Thanks.
Yeah, can we do a little background on Aaron? Like, is that appropriate? Tell us how you got into this.
Oh, into transportation planning? Well, it was a long circular way that started in doing biology and forest ecology and wildfire science, as one does, and then going immediately into planning and transportation. So, but no, I've lived in a number of different places around the U.S., and I think the link between science and ecology and ecosystems and planning is very close, and so just through those experiences led me into planning and transportation over the years.
What was give us like a little story, a little nugget vignette about the moment it all kind of came together.
The moment.
I think probably the first nugget came when I was moved from Seattle to Oklahoma City, which is a big move in terms of how those living in the two very different cities and going from a place like Seattle where I could live without a car as a very vibrant city and going to some place like Oklahoma City, which is just very different. It's much more spread out, suburban. I think it was just in the very early years of their sort of urban renaissance.
They're famous for their renaissance.
Yeah, they went through.
What year was this then?
Oh, that was 2004, I think so, about 20 years ago. Exactly 20 years ago.
That's about the beginning of their renaissance.
Yeah, exactly. And so just seeing that difference between cities and how you could live your life in those two very different places got me very interested in what goes into that and how you can make places that are more livable and interesting.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, fast forward to today, January 2024, and your current role. Tell us about the MPO. What does a metropolitan planning organization do, and how does that figure into local city and county governments?
The Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, we're essentially just a regional coordination body. So we ensure that there's good coordination and planning for transportation across all of the different entities within what we call the urban area. So thinking about the more developed part of Missoula County and the city of Missoula. And it's federally required. So every community in the U.S. with 50,000 people or more has an MPO to help plan through those transportation issues and ensure coordination between the different parties, like the State Department of Transportation, our transit provider, Mountain Line, the city, the county. Ultimately, the way I think about it is when you drive from the city to the county, your experience shouldn't change that much, that there isn't this dividing line and all of a sudden you're on a very different road or a very different facility. It should be fairly seamless. And the MPO helps us coordinate that so that what the city is doing and what the county and the state are all doing work together so that you don't immediately notice when you go from one to the other.
So if I understand you right, what you're saying, as roads change, and we all know when you're in a population center, typically roads are one sort of way. And then as you go out into the country, they change. And what you're saying is that change shouldn't be at the city-county line. It should happen where it kind of organically feels like
yes, exactly.
To happen.
You want that transition to be seamless and for it to make sense based on the context of where you are, not an arbitrary administrative boundary.
So how many MPOs are there in the state?
There are currently 5. We originally had 3 up until the most recent census, and in 2020, the population of both Bozeman and Helena grew enough to become MPOs, and so they're in the formation process right now.
So what do we know about how that might impact our own MPO? Does that mean that the slices of the pie in the state of Montana get smaller or something else?
The pie, if you will, of funding for Montana stays the same. It's based on our overall state population and federal formula funding, and that money that goes to MPOs for planning gets divided up based on however many MPOs there are. So those 2 new MPOs definitely have affected how much money we get for planning.
For planning.
For planning purposes, yes. Not so much for federal funding in general for the state.
So I just got to say this part for our dozens of listeners out there. That's federal money going to the MPO.
Yes,
Not
correct.
state money and absolutely not local taxpayer money.
Yes, exactly. All the work that I do as the MPO is all federally funded. There is a small amount of state match that goes towards that, but there is no city or county funding going to the MPO in the work that we do.
Thanks.
Yeah.
You were talking earlier about this transition into a more rural area, but and that experience, but also how do rural residents benefit from the work of the MPO?
Yeah, well, places like Missoula are regional hubs. So, most people you talk to who live in Missoula County will come to Missoula for something. The city of Missoula, whether it's for shopping or jobs or other services, maybe it's going to the hospital for medical care. And so they're using those streets and roads. And then there's also that transition from urban to rural. And what does that look like? And how can we plan effectively for those kinds of facilities?
Can you be more specific about when you're talking about the transition? What are the elements of transition?
Yeah, so it's, I think, the intensity of use, what's going on alongside that road, what kinds of destinations might there be. A good example would be as you're driving east, say through East Missoula and then going through Bonner and then from Bonner out to Potomac, the landscape changes pretty dramatically and the level of traffic changes. And so you want to be thoughtful about that, again, so that people aren't running into a brick wall of traffic as soon as they hit a particular boundary. So thinking about those kinds of transitions and also for the rural residents coming to Missoula, what's their experience like, and they're using those roadways and making sure that they're probably driving. They're not going to be able to use a bike path necessarily if they're coming in for a medical appointment, making sure that we have that available for them, roadways, and not just focused on other transportation.
So if you're a rural resident or a guest and you're coming from the north or from the northwest or the west, you get to drive down this infamous street, Reserve Street. How did it end up being a 5-lane monster through the Costco Valley that looks like everywhere in America?
Yeah, gosh, there could probably be a whole podcast
Once upon a time.
right, wait.
Gather round, children.
Yeah.
There could
How
probably
did it
be
happen?
you could do a whole series of the history of Reserve Street, I think. It would make a very fascinating podcast.
Almost every community has one.
Yeah, it's true. And in fact, Kalispell has a Reserve Street that is being built as a bypass.
It's in the name. It's in the title.
It's in the name, yeah. The history of Reserve Street, as Missoula built out to the west and the areas around Reserve went from that kind of more rural agricultural, and Highway 93 was established through there. Reserve Street has been Highway 93 since it was expanded and connected across the river, which I believe happened in the 60s or 70s. The first bridge was built. And then in the 90s, because of that highway designation and the growth in Missoula and wanting to facilitate that, it was really thinking of it as a bypass to get from the Bitterroot up to I-90 and then north to Kalispell or going west. And so it was built as this bypass, if you will, and expanded to the 5 lanes that it is today. I think that was completed in the mid-90s. I remember when they completed that growing up in Missoula, and there really was, it's just fields out there.
I
and
remember
a few
that
stores.
too.
Yeah. And then what happens is you build this great transportation infrastructure and you've got a lot of vacant land that's easy to develop on. It's flat, it's underutilized, it's fields. So what happened is developers came in and built in the 90s a lot of big box stores. And so those came in and you saw this incredible growth along North Reserve.
Does something happen to the sugar beet market?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's behind Target. That was the sugar beet mill.
So help me with the history, though.
Well, it went away and opened up land for...
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of an arc in the sort of history of commercial ventures and retail in America where we went from having a downtown where you could buy hardware and sporting goods as well as lunch, to having a downtown that was mostly boarded up and everything went out to the mall. All that kind of commercial venture went to the mall. And then the big boxes arrived, slowed down the excitement around the mall, and we saw a resurgence in downtowns that became places that sold experience rather than goods. And now we have these 3 things kind of reached a state of equilibrium where they all definitely can coexist.
Yeah, you see very different contexts around those too, in terms of how people get there, how people get around, the kinds of businesses you see there. So
and you see the same trend in many other communities across the United States. This isn't specific to Missoula at all.
We're not anomalous here at all. And in fact, I would argue, and I would probably say that folks would agree with me who traveled elsewhere, as difficult as it may be at sometimes to get through Reserve Street, this is not as massive a deal as other metropolitan areas. I'm just going to lay it out there. Folks in Montana and Missoula, it could be a lot worse. In fact, we are the problem ourselves to some extent. So let me just editorialize ever so briefly, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, Aaron. So I bet I was out on Reserve Street. One of the folks plugging the doggone thing up at least 3, 4, 5 times this last week or so. So one of the questions that folks often ask, or they assume the answer of this question is another bypass, is who is using Reserve Street right now? I think the assumption is it's all those folks who want to just get through Missoula to somewhere else. And with the example I just mentioned, I'm part of the problem myself because I'm out there shopping in some of those big box stores.
And with those massive asphalt acreages in front of the big boxes, it's obviously not just people trying to get from Florence to Kalispell. There are plenty of people shopping at those stores, and in order to get to those stores, you had to drive on that road.
Yeah, and I think even the people who may be driving through from the Bitterroot up to Kalispell, having a place to stop, there's that, you're dealing with traffic, but you have to get gas. You might want to get lunch. There's all those things that you can do that there's a real economic value to having people go through, traveling through your community. And I think we all recognize that. And so it's not necessarily even just an either or. It's sort of everyone is using that for a lot of different purposes.
So there's a sense out there that it's a fabulously dangerous road. What does that mean, and to what degree of truth is in that statement?
Well, I think there's always a nugget of truth there, right? That we see a lot of crashes on Reserve Street, and it is the place where we see the most crashes in Missoula, the Reserve Street corridor. It shows up when you look at just the total number of crashes.
When you say corridor, from where to where are you talking?
Usually when I think of Reserve Street, it's Brooks to I-90.
Okay.
But it's very different. Again, this is
South
something
and
we
north
can,
are really different.
Yeah, it's very different. And so there's different sections and different contexts to the corridor. But it does have some of the highest numbers of crashes. But when we talk about risk, we really want to think about the number of crashes per vehicle mile traveled or per trip on Reserve Street. And when you start to average things that way, so then you can actually compare it to a Broadway or a Brooks, knowing that there's different volumes of traffic, you might see that it's not any more dangerous than Brooks or Higgins or Broadway.
So it's how many crashes per 100 cars.
Yes,
something
exactly.
like that.
Yep.
That's a meaningful.
Yeah, a rate is a much easier way to compare it to other, because every roadway is different, right? I mean, there's different numbers of vehicles, there's different contexts, and so they all have different elements of risk to them.
And are we talking fatalities? Are we talking car crashes where there's property damage?
Yeah, well, that's the other piece that's really important to look at is how many of those crashes actually have a severe injury or a fatality and then not just a fender bender. And, those have significance too. They cost money, they slow traffic. Yeah. But what we're really focused on is the people who are injured and the people who are killed on a roadway. And so that's another element of the risk.
Just going back to, I think it was the question you asked, Juanita, as far as the genesis of Reserve Street. And what we're seeing out there seems to be, at least partially, if not largely, a function of land use. And maybe this goes back to your earlier life, Aaron, and studying such things academically. And there's no way to know at this point in time, but I'm envisioning a situation where perhaps the land uses were different along Reserve Street or were regulated differently, zoned differently than what they were that allowed the sort of commercial development that we see out there today. Were that not the case, then the traffic patterns, traffic flow, it might have be very different. And it might have actually been serving the intended purpose of being a quasi bypass. If you will.
Yeah.
Dave has me thinking about the first time I met you, Aaron. You posed a question, I think it was at a charrette or something. What could have happened if the entrance and exits to those big box stores hadn't been on Reserve Street, but had been off of Reserve Street on one of those
side streets.
Street. Yeah. And what happened there? Why wasn't that thought of at the time when Costco first went in, or when these box or the Grand Creek or whatever, when these box stores went in and those developments?
And what would the effect of that be? Just because I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around it. If you turned off onto a side street and then went to a big box store instead of approached right
than
off
me
the
who
road.
wants to get to Kalispell and doesn't want to go to the box store.
Right. Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things at play there. One is just how comfortable is it to do anything other than drive in an area. So as you're thinking about store, the way that North Reserve has developed, you have big box stores, and then you have a really large parking lot from the entrance to the roadway, and then you have this high volume, high speed roadway. So if you imagine walking down Reserve Street, you have a bunch of cars parked on one side and a huge asphalt parking lot, and then you have this high speed, high volume roadway on the other. It's a really uncomfortable place. No one would ever go to Reserve Street to say, I'm going to go for a walk, I'm going to go out there and walk around. You're probably only walking out there by necessity. And so that just changes the characteristics. So people only think about driving there, and then that just becomes the pattern and the behavior. And if you design different ways, you can sort of change that. And, maybe you build more towards the street to make it comfortable for walking. You put the parking lots on the back. I don't know that would necessarily make Reserve Street any better, because I think there are other issues with Reserve in terms of it's trying to do everything well. It's sort of trying to be a jack of all trades street, and it's just not doing any of them that
When
great.
you say jack of all trades, I imagine, I'm just guessing, fill in the list here, but I'm thinking you're saying the street wants to be able to convey people from Florence to Kalispell to make this bridge from one side of our valley to the other. It also needs to get people to these stores and to their houses and to restaurants. And can one road do both those things?
Well, I think that's the problem with Reserve Street right now, and both with the adjacent land use and with what it's trying to do, that you can make a road safe for through travel. So think about I-90. That's designed to be focused on just moving people through. It's a highway. That's what it's for. And you can't get on and off it anywhere you want. You can't walk on it. It's really designed, and so that becomes a much safer facility for that kind of use. Reserve is trying to do that, but also trying to accommodate all of that local traffic and the mixing and the sort of urban interactions that you see on other kinds of streets. And you can't do all of that safely and move vehicles quickly and accommodate all of that. So it's just that idea of the triangle, and you can have two but not all three. It's, what do you want to pick and what do you want Reserve Street to do?
Is this the concept of a strode?
Yeah, to some extent. I think,
street plus road.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Reserve Street is somewhere in between, the Strode. It's trying to be a street, but also trying to be a highway.
What do you think the answer is?
And what's going on right now,
Right.
planning-wise?
Yeah, well, we're trying to figure out the answer, I think, is the first question. And some of that depends on what we want as a community for that roadway. And it goes beyond just Missoula, which is sort of one of the challenges.
How so?
Because it is that national highway. I mean, Highway 93 goes from Canada to Mexico, and so you get some of that traffic. And I think as a community, we need to decide what's going to make it better for us. Do we want to facilitate just moving through as quickly as possible? If that's the goal, I think we can do that reasonably well. But if the goal is to have a street that people actually want to interact with and can get across and do all of those things that an urban street needs to do, then we need to shift away from this idea that vehicles will still be able to get through. It'll never be totally gridlocked, but they'll be slower.
So I remember early on in this job, you and I worked together, and we did one of the better sessions of community engagement I've ever been involved in. It was really amazing. Artists drawing things.
Yeah, it was great.
People were super active. It was really well done. What do you think are some of the takeaways from that in terms of what does the community want from Reserve Street?
A lot of what we heard from people is they were frustrated with being stuck in traffic. They wanted it to function more efficiently, but they also were people who lived nearby, and they wanted to be able to walk to the grocery store, or some people wanted to be able to bike. Reserve Street is their only route to get from their home to their job, and they want to be able to safely bike through there. And there was a lot of just feeling that Reserve Street is kind of hostile, doing things that can make it just much more inviting.
So can you tease us just a little bit? I'm sure folks are wondering, so what does that mean? Even though we're in this planning process now to maybe get some more specific answers, what might an example be of something that would make it perhaps less hostile, recognizing that we've only got so much road right-of-way width there, and so unless you tear up parking lots in the big box stores and add additional lanes, which probably won't necessarily solve the problems that folks have identified, what else might be just a nugget of something?
Just to add to this, aren't there some very real jurisdictional kind of zones of responsibility?
Yeah, this is where the MPO really comes into play, is that the Reserve Street is owned, it's a federal highway, and so the Montana Department of Transportation owns that facility, and it's their roadway.
And what does roadway mean?
It's their right of way. So basically, from the outside of the sidewalk to the outside of the sidewalk, or that transportation space in between the individual property owners. And so MDT is responsible for making decisions about the roadway. Ultimately, it's their road. But what the MPO does gives us the opportunity to collaborate. So Reserve Street is doing more than just serving the Montana Department of Transportation's goals. It's a very urban street. It's part of Missoula. And so we need to make those decisions together. And the MPO sort of gives us an avenue to do that through our committees and the collaboration and the federal funding.
Is there a formal relationship between MDT and the MPO?
Yeah, so MDT supports the MPO, and because we're a federally designated...
Support with dollars?
Yeah, some dollars. They support the work that we do through staff and other...
They're actually a voting member of
Yeah,
Transportation Policy Coordinating.
Yes. of which Commissioner Strohmeyer is also part of.
And me too.
Commissioner Slotnick, yes. But the MPO has that leverage of we have to approve any federal funding that goes into infrastructure within that urban area. And so it gives us an opportunity to have that collaborative, MDT has goals that they need to meet and they're making decisions about that route as the state DOT. But we have this federally designated body that can help ensure that there's close coordination.
Back to Strohmeyer's.
Yeah, we're not going to let you off too easy.
Yeah, no, that's
what's
good.
an
Yeah.
example of like hostility reduction?
Great example would be there's a crosswalk on North Reserve. I think this one has come up a number of times where there's a crosswalk that's marked there, and there's some
Where is this?
It's up kind of by the hotels on North Reserve. So
By Rowdy's cabin?
yeah, by Rowdy's Cabin. Yep, just north of Expressway. All it is paint on the ground. For people to get across and some signs. And when you think about a 4-lane road, maybe one person stops, the person
Have you
in the
guys
next
walked
lane.
across Reserve Street?
Never, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
done it twice, pushing
It's
half
terrifying,
dozen
yes.
shopping carts, and then another time just with my own 2 legs and just me, myself, and I, and it was.
Were you in a crosswalk?
It makes you pucker.
Yeah, yeah.
It's, it's,
People have had horrible injuries doing
Yeah,
that.
yeah. No,
and
it's,
I'm
it's bad.
able-bodied and able to walk across it, and it was at a crosswalk.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was impressed by how nervous it made me.
Yeah, and that's a good example of like hostile is maybe a strong word, but you
No,
feel really
I
uncomfortable.
think hostile is the right word.
Yeah. So there's things you can do for pedestrian crossings like that. You could put in. You don't even necessarily need to do a full traffic signal. They have these things called
The flashing lights.
Yeah, the flashing lights, or there's even more. It's called a hybrid activated signal, and it looks like 3 red lights that start flashing. It's a signal. They use them in larger cities all over for these kinds of bigger roadways because it's almost like a signal, but it's really for pedestrians, and so it stops vehicles. It's much more signalized, and
And that was just a demonstration project, or did it?
no, this
say
is
that?
something. It's actual, like almost like a signal that you put in, but it's really
So-
specific to crossing pedestrians. But they're shown to reduce crashes and improve.
did it work?
Oh yeah.
So
And
why
it's-
don't why don't
why
we
is it-
Not in Reserve Street. We haven't done it in Reserve Street yet.
so
I guess.
why
not?
don't we have one by
Yeah.
Rowdy's Cabin?
Funding and getting again that idea of working with the state to make those kinds of
So
improvements on their
MDT needs
roadway.
to know that it's a
Yes.
priority and that it's their decision
Yes.
to put it there.
Do they know it's something we want?
Yeah, I think so. And we do planning to identify these projects, and ideally you want to look at it sort of comprehensively. So that sort of like is the lead into the Safe Streets for All grant that we got that is going to provide the money to do the study of the whole corridor and identify those kinds of comprehensive safety improvements. And it's always this push and pull of how much do you want to slow or delay traffic versus improving safety and allowing people to cross, because every person you have crossing the street might be interrupting traffic flow. And so you're always looking at how much do we care about traffic flow versus people getting across and safety. And ideally you want to land on safety every time.
You mentioned study. What do you mean?
We have funding to do a comprehensive safety study for Reserve Street from Brooks all the way up to I-90.
When's that going to happen?
We have the funding. It'll likely start sometime this summer. We have to get
Great.
through some federal bureaucratic red tape, get the grant agreements in place, hire
So
consultants.
You guys hire some folks
Yep.
to do that study.
Yeah, we want to hire specialists who really understand it. And
What sort of things will they be looking at?
first is trying to answer that question of what are we designing for? What does Reserve Street want to be, and how do we design for that to operate as safely as possible? And then we look at what are some quick interventions we can do, things like those crosswalks.
Go back. How is that answered? Because we're just kind of kvetching about being
Yeah.
able to walk across Reserve Street, but maybe it's okay that we aren't able to walk across.
it's not
Reserve Street,
designed
because
for
it's not
that.
designed for
Yeah.
that, and people might be okay with that and recognize that it's meant to be driven down, and that's.
Yep. I
how-
think
how
it's
do
a
you-
real-
How do you square that, or how?
I think it's a combination of really hard community conversations where we try to get to that of what are we willing to trade off in
Because
terms
where
of.
else are you going to have that sort of traffic that's trying to get to I-90?
Yeah,
Where else are they gonna go?
Brooks, I think Brooks and Orange, there's sort of like 2 routes to get
And
to
then if you're
I-90.
going down Brooks. Oh my gosh. Brooks,
Yeah.
When you get to Higgins,
Or
That's-
Orange.
nightmare.
Or it would be Brooks to Orange.
Brooks to Orange.
Oh.
Or Brooks, Stevens, Orange.
Because
yeah.
Higgins
Okay.
doesn't connect to the
Yeah.
highway.
Yeah,
Sorry,
Higgins
I
doesn't
was
actually
thinking
go
Brooks
anywhere
to
other than
downtown,
downtown.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but
So
still,
Brooks to Orange.
is
Yeah.
that's I wouldn't want to be driving like an 18-wheeler.
No, no. So I think that's one of the challenges we have. It does have that regional impact, and so we want to be able to continue to facilitate that, but sort of what's the extent to which we want to create a street that you can easily get across? And we know we have a ton of growth. We're prioritizing growth in an area just west of Reserve Street in that kind of North Reserve area.
So how long is the study period?
The study period will be probably 9 months to a year. We
So-
hope to get it done pretty quickly.
So I'm just going to guess, having seen some of these sorts of things happen in the past, we do a study, come up with some recommendations, look for money to do the planning,
Yeah.
If we're successful with that, then we look for money to do the actual construction.
Yes.
Is that kind of did I get that right?
Yep. Yeah. So the money we got is actually for what we call a safety action plan. So that at the end of that, we would have a list of here's all the improvements we think we could make. There will be some short-term quick fixes. There will be long-term things that might cost millions of dollars. When we try to prioritize those, and then once we have that list, we then go back and say, okay, what funding can we put towards that? We can apply for additional federal grants. We can look at our local federal funding that we can program, and we just start working our way down that list.
Will the study ask the question or try to get at who is using Reserve Street? Because just looping back to a question that we were kicking around earlier on related to the assumption that the majority of folks using Reserve Street are just trying to get through Missoula to somewhere else, and then the subsequent thought is, well, we need a bypass to get around Missoula. Yep. But to be able to answer the question, is that really the fix that's necessary? We need to know who's using Reserve Street. And I'd hazard a guess that there will never be a bypass just by virtue of the fact that unless Josh out in Target Range, you want to get up your property.
Oh, Lord.
I'm sure there are folks out in...
and I think when you mentioned, Dave, the gridlock that we've all experienced visiting other major cities, we're experiencing what happens when there is no bypass. There's no way to go around. You just have to go through, and that means you wait. And I'm just guessing in many major American cities, there was no good bypass, so you have gridlock instead.
Right. And
Aaron's making a face for those of you who can't see him.
That's just my thinking face.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, what are you thinking about, Aaron?
What I think you see is when you build a bypass, it functions as a bypass for a short period of time, but then again, like Reserve Street was the bypass.
Yeah.
And you're seeing this up in Kalispell where they've built their bypass, and that's where you're seeing all of the growth in housing and residential, and so that's becoming a new street for them, that they're going to have these problems 10, 20 years down the road. It's no longer going to be the bypass.
I mean, it's a, when you use the word intersection here,
Yeah.
right? It's not talking about cars,
Right.
but you see the intersection between land use and development and transportation. So if we put in a big new road where there is no road right now, it won't just be a road with empty land next to it. People who own that land will say, oh my goodness, look, I own land next to a road where there's 10,000 cars going every day. Yeah. I think I should sell some of this land to somebody who wants to develop it, because there's an incredible opportunity to get a hold of some of those folks who are in the cars zipping by. So if you wanted your bypass to just be a bypass, you'd actually have to use some land use, some planning tools alongside the road, so it never became anything but a road.
Yeah, which is really hard to do, and I don't know of many communities that have been able to. This idea that you can sort of build your way out of traffic is just hasn't been shown to be successful anywhere in the country.
Well, and here in Missoula, and let's just be honest with ourselves, the options for such a bypass, even if it was warranted, are Orchard Homes, Target Range, condemning massive amounts of private property there, or Blue Mountain circuitously looping around to Frenchtown or something. Could you $500 million project.
Could you ever imagine the Graves Creek to Petty Creek? Could you see that being a paved 2-lane, tiny highway where you're just getting people who are coming from the west heading east, and they wanted to be going south, and then you just go around all of it by cutting through the mountains?
The Jack would love it for business.
And then you're going through national forest land, so the potential for development is quite low.
I think if you were able to be successful with something like that, you would see a lot more of those, and you just don't. It's indirect. Like that road's going to be windy. It's going to be steep.
Correct.
It's not going to feel great. You're probably realistically you'd be faster just going up Reserve Street even today and take I-90
and safer.
And
I'm
safer.
just trying to think of first responders responding to any accidents through there would just be a nightmare.
I mean, I live in Target Range, and when it's the thick of traffic during the day, and if I had to get to the airport to pick somebody up, I go around down to Kona Ranch Road and go all the way around. And
is it actually faster, or is it just a better driving experience?
It's just a better driving experience. It's about the same, but instead of sitting in traffic and being surrounded by all of that,
you just got to play better
driving
music.
in a really. I just do the beautiful scenic route, take an extra 5 minutes, and enjoy music, and be like, man, this is fine. And then when I'm bringing guests in, they feel like, oh, it's so beautiful, instead of saying, oh, it looks just like where I came from.
Yeah.
Well, invariably, I will see a train blocking Madison Street and say, I'm just going to drive around to Van Buren. And by the time I get to Van Buren, the train's gone.
Right.
Well, that was a lot to sink our teeth into today.
Absolutely.
And so we're going to have to call it a day, but we want to pick up where we left off in the next episode of The Agenda. Thanks so much for joining us today, Aaron.
Thanks a lot,
Yeah,
Aaron.
thanks for
It's
having
great
me.
having you.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to The Agenda. If you enjoy these conversations, it would mean a lot if you'd rate and review the show on whichever podcast app you use.
And if you know a friend who would like to keep up with what's happening in local government, be sure to recommend this podcast to them.
The Agenda with the Missoula County Commissioners is made possible with support from Missoula Community Access Television, better known as MCAT, and our staff in the Missoula County Communications Division.
If you have a question or a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, email it to communications@missoulacounty.us.
To find out other ways to stay up to date with what's happening in Missoula County, go to missoula.co/county updates.
Thanks for listening.